Greetings, everyone. My name is Eduardo Rocha, and this is the San Antonio International Women's Day Report draft. Again, my name is Eduardo, and I am a revolutionary organizer and master social worker. I represent the industrial workers of the world and the uh, the social service mental health union 615. So this past Saturday, March 12th, uh, 2022 at 10:30 a.m. I attended the 31st annual San Antonio International Women's Day rally and march virtually online. Due to some schedule conflicts, I was not able to be present for the event physically. However, I got to educate myself on the various organizations and individuals working collectively, keeping the struggle moving forward. Mujeres Marcharán is the San Antonio International Women's Day March Planning Committee, who organizes year-round here locally. Rachel Tucker from the Party for Socialism and Liberation and March organizer enthusiastically co-emceed with Jessica O. Guerrero, a fierce advocate, community organizer, and cultural worker. Rachel introduced the relatives Krista Mancias, Diana, and Añayance, representing the Carrizo Comecrudo tribe, who opened up the space with a blessing to the land and all our relations. Krista brought up their involvement in environmental justice work at the state and national level and connecting why we should be anti-patriarchal because our roots are matriarchal. Krista states, we work both with men and with women, but we work together as one and one. They educated people about missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, and their mission to bring our missing home and help the families of the murdered and cope and support them through the process of grief. After the blessing, Jessica continued to pump up the crowd with a chant, Se oye, se siente, el pueblo está presente. Jessica then gave the community space and time to shout out names of those who have transitioned to the spirit world due to the pandemic or other circumstances to acknowledge their loved ones. Next, Rachel introduced Jessica as the first speaker who broke down the history of the march and acknowledged the work of the many women involved for 32 years and beyond. They have laid out traditions that we honor today and maintain. The slogan for this year, No nos moverán, we will not be moved, from the song that was translated to Spanish in a jail cell here in San Antonio by Matana Yuka and her comrades after the police imposed riots at the municipal auditorium in the early 1920s and 1930s. The same song was also translated throughout Latin America, and we share that same spirit of resistance and struggle for liberation. Fuerza Unida did not speak, but were acknowledged for their decades of work. Pedra Mata, Viola Casares, and others not mentioned here. Please forgive me. Please correct me. Also, if the information needs to be updated, I will update it as necessary. So Fuerza Unida's mission is to empower women's workers, particularly women workers of color and their families, to achieve social, economic, and environmental justice through education, organizing, and advocacy. Rachel introduced the second speaker, Araceli Herrera, representing Domésticas Unidas. The organization was formed on October 12th, 2012, and it works towards the goal of empowering domestic workers in San Antonio, Texas, and its surroundings. As founder and director of Domésticas Unidas, Araceli uses her own experience as a domestic worker in all of the projects carried out by the organization. She has been an activist for many years, always fighting for women's rights, not just in the workplace, but at home. at church and everywhere else. She gave a very passionate speech connecting her struggle to the event. She brought up the patriarchal laws that attack women daily, her testimony in New York, and how the struggle for abortion rights were won in Argentina, Chile, and Mexico, not just by voting, but by the masses of people in the streets fighting for their rights. Jessica introduced Rachel, Emma, and Quinoa, who were the third speakers representing the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which has chapters in 200 cities across the United States, or the United Snakes. Locally, they have been involved in direct actions for housing justice, climate justice, and speaking the truth to the oppressors that stifle our communities in the grassroots. They are one of the conveners of this year's marching organizers. The organization believes that the only solution to the deepening crisis of capitalism is the socialist transformation of society. Next, Rachel introduced Jules Vaquera, membership coordinator for Veterans for Peace. Veteran of the imperialist wars and not proud of it, she entertained the crowd with her singer-songwriter skills on her acoustic guitar. Veterans for Peace is a global organization of military veterans and allies whose collective efforts are to build a collective of peace by using their experiences and lifting their voices. They inform the public of the true causes of war and the enormous cost of war, with an obligation to heal the wounds of wars. Their network is comprised of over 140 chapters worldwide, whose work includes educating the public, advocating for a dismantling of the war economy, providing services that assist veterans and victims of war, and most significantly, working to end all wars. Jules mentioned being at a songwriting retreat where a man shared a song called Soldier Girl. The song was about how no one treats her differently because she is a woman, because she's a soldier, and that means she's just like everyone else. And then she looked around at the other women. Jules looked around at the other women in the room and realized really quickly that just was not the experience that any of them had. The song she performed was about the stories men tell themselves so they don't have to believe that they participate in women's oppression. Next, Jessica introduced Indigenous-centered autonomous Brown Berets, who are a grassroots revolutionary organization in San Antonio that focuses on mutual aid and protection against police and La Migra, serving the community and acting as a vanguard against oppression, racism, and poverty. They stand firm on their stance against toxic masculinity, machismo, homophobia, transphobia. Next, Jessica introduced Molly Wright, a local housing justice activist who allotted her time to Alicia Garlock, representing the Stop the Chop movement. Stop the Chop is a community alliance formed to have 1050 clearing code repealed because it is not based on sound scientific evidence and promoting unacceptable tree removal in our communities, which displaces our feathered relatives who migrate from Mexico, Central and South America. Brackenridge Park is sacred to many indigenous tribes and communities, and the proposed demolition will disrupt the ecosystem and dishonor natural elements that are sacred down the stream from the Blue Hole, which is the source of the San Antonio River, or Yanawana, the spirit waters. They will have their first public engagement meeting at the Whitty Museum March 22nd from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. You can find more on Save the Grandfather Trees and Migratory Birds on Facebook. Next, Rachel introduced Ananda Thomas, police reform activist that was part of a group that spearheaded Prop B to eliminate the collective bargaining agreement with the San Antonio Police Officer Association that was unsuccessful, demonstrating public discontent. Ananda is the executive director and founder of Act for San Antonio, accountability, compassion, transparency for San Antonio. They are the first organization focusing solely on police reform and the remaining reimagining of public safety. The fight for women's rights is integral to the fight for police reform. You cannot say Black Lives Matter or you support police reform initiatives and not realize that means protecting women, especially transgender women in the work, states Nanda. She also mentioned trans relatives are 4 times likely to experience police violence, 7 times more likely to experience physical violence when interacting with police compared to cisgender victims and survivors. Next, Rachel introduced Karen Munoz, representing the Melissa Lucio movement. Melissa Lucio has been on death row for 13 years. She is set to be executed on April 27th, 2022, and will be the first Indigenous Latina woman in the state of Texas to be executed. 14 years ago, she was wrongfully convicted for the murder of her 2-year-old daughter who fell down the stairs in a terrible accident. They they really framed her and used junk science, interrogating her on the same day her daughter died for 7 hours, really just coercing her into pleading guilty. There is a documentary about this case right now on Hulu where you can learn more about it. The state of Texas versus Melissa is what the documentary is titled. The state of Texas versus Melissa on Hulu. Melissa is from Cameron County. You can find more information at freemelissa.org. Again, freemelissa.org. Next, Jessica introduced Myra Duma-Pias, representing the Asian American and Pacifica Islanders for Justice. They formed to unite Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders as a voice that speaks up about injustice in San Antonio and educates about issues impacting their community and advocacy efforts for justice alongside justice for Africans, Indigenous, and people of color. I was able to physically be in attendance for the peace vigil for lives impacted by anti-Asian hate with a healing circle and self-defense demo downtown at Travis Park. Myra mentioned having the movement be recognized as interrelated and international because all women need to be on the front line against imperialism, the difference from being a collective versus an individualistic culture, and our actions having to be related to the actions of other things. She also spoke about how imperialism works to divide our way of life and segregates us from one another, and how colonialism sets us up for failure in how we form our relationships with one another. Everyone took a position that they wanted the absolute and unequivocal liberation of women, the struggle for LGBTQ comradeship, environmental emancipation, fundamental to any revolutionary organization, and conscious social movement is the absolute economic, political, and social determination of women, in particular Indigenous, Chicana women, and all colonized women. My impression of the event was positive because about 200 people were present and got to educate themselves about the history, the struggle for women's liberation, and the importance of being involved in an organization working for justice. Those presenting were very organized and really motivated the community to take action and get involved. From a social work perspective, I learned that we must get organized and engaged in social and political action that seeks to ensure that all people have equal access to the resources, employment, services, and opportunities that are required to meet their basic human needs and to develop fully.